Hey, my name's Kyle Daniels. I'm the head of marketing at Assimilate, and we've been working with the guys at IBM to bring you some amazing content on data governance and AI. We hope you enjoy it. So Brendan, thank you so much for joining us. So the reason that we've got you on this little fireside, for this beautiful plant, is
not much fire.
It's not much good for us. I want to talk about what's the next governance, because obviously it's a product that you guys have. I know that we've done a lot of stuff recently around the data governance side of it, but I want to talk about the product. So probably for the people that are listening and watching at home, what's the next governance?
What's the next governance is a product around AI governance. So, and it stems, what you may not realize is we've been doing AI since 1956, which is kind of a long cycle. While we've done a lot of public things like playing the world chess champion and doing all of that, we've been working with businesses at implementing AI, predictive AI initially, but now more latterly generative AI. And so over the years, we've worked out that obviously guardrails are required for AI. And I think we're one of the first organizations in the world to set up an AI ethics board, which generally look at the ethical approach to AI within the organization, how we sell our products, how we represent ourselves to our employees and our customers, what positions do we want to take on things like, facial recognition and stuff like that, which we now are not in the market because we believe it can be used by bad actors, for example. Okay. And that obviously then filters its way down to how we deploy AI within our own organization and within customer organizations. And indeed, the ethics approach is the organizational approach. So how does our organization want to structure ethically around AI and how it supports regulations that are emerging with AI, like the EU Act and the FSA regulations, etc. But it's clear that just having those structures and processes isn't enough. You then need tools to be able to manage AI. So we've had a version of What's Next governance in market for a while now in terms of looking at predictive models, and indeed customers like Credit Mutual and places like that, where we've had the concept of understanding what the model does and being able to monitor it. What's X governance is around monitoring AI and generative AI, but taking it from a clear aspect of looking at a use case for AI that you may come up with and assessing it for risk. What do we mean by that? It might be looking at it from a regulatory risk point of view. How does this this use case measure up against a regulatory compliance standard? Is it high risk? How do we mitigate those risks? How does it stand up against the ethics of an organization? How does it say, another risk is cost? Does it, to use an antiques roadshow, kind of wipe its face? Is it going to stand up, in terms of cost benefit? Are there legal implications? If you're onboarding models, have I tested them? So this is something that happens in the business, and it's very much a business workflow that we handle through a business interface. And it's a business decision. Previously, we were asking data scientists to make decisions about regulatory compliance and build that in, and put a lot of pressure on them. This is about the business and the right risk people making the right decisions, or the right legal people or the finance people, all being part of that collaborative approach in deciding whether a piece of AI should be built before it's built. I mean, we've seen a lot of occasions where AI's been built and then had to go back into reproduction when it hasn't gone through those phases. The idea is then you're looking at how do we produce that AI and set a set of guardrails that mitigate against those risks through that process. So that's the first stage, and it's done in what we call a governance console, which is very much a business console. Interesting enough, that business console also allows the organization to look at, and we'll come back to this, AI in production, what AI is used where for what use cases, what models are used for what use cases, and the workflows to onboarding if they should procure AI. The next stage is obviously that goes to a data scientist to build, and very much built into that whole process is I might prompt a model. So I might have the ability to prompt models of different sizes. Why did I use a 70 billion parameter model rather than a 7 billion parameter model? And there might be a real reason. when we come to evaluate the model. And so we have some really nice tooling within that process that looks at key risks. And it comes out, we've built something called a risk atlas in IBM Research that looks at use cases and the sorts of metrics that we can introduce to measure against the risk of those use cases. So, and it suggests those, and they're configurable so that the data scientist, when he starts to prompt the model, can, dependent on if it's a summarization, can measure it against things like hate and profanity, or it could be against accuracy, or readability. Very many different open standards measures, but ones that we've introduced. So they start to build metrics to say whether it's within those thresholds. And as the data scientist goes through those, that's filtered back to that console dashboard, which allows the business to see that not only is the piece of AI achieving a functional acceptability, but also an acceptability from all of the other guardrails, finance, ethics, those types of things. And that there's a full audit trail back to what I was saying. Why did that data scientist choose a 70 billion parameter model over a 7 billion parameter model? There's a difference in cost of inferencing, but it might be that the accuracy was better with the 70 billion parameter model. There's an audit trail that explains that decision-making process that can be filtered back to the business. Then the last stage is, obviously, before it goes into production, is that final approval. Now, obviously, should data scientists mark their own homework? Probably not. But within that ML ops process, there's probably someone that needs to assess that it's achieved those. And probably in the business, someone that signs that off and says, I think it's met all the criteria, let's approve it to go live. Yeah. And that's a normal process in most businesses. Once it's in production, this is another key area. Predictive AI is never, its logic comes from the data that serves it. So it can degrade over time. It can become more biased. Yeah. With generative AI, it can drift. There can be accuracy problems. We keep talking about explainability as being key, certainly in predictive, and increasingly we're starting to see things that try to explain why generative models have come to the answers they have, and other metrics. But the beauty of this is that we can monitor these models, understand whether, an HR model is going to be very high risk, by the European measure, but also by your corporate measure. Someone in HR is going to want to monitor that model, not just a data scientist. Is my HR model becoming biased? Is it a high risk issue? Do I need to raise a change request? If it's a loan application, for example, is my loan application becoming biased? Now, it might be two records that cause it to become biased, right? I would say that the loans manager has got more of an opportunity to drill down and can drill down to the records that caused it to go beyond those thresholds and actually say, those records are utterly spurious. Yeah. They were just someone putting in random requests and it's not the application that's the problem. But the idea is to bring the business closer to what's being augmented or automated and allow them as part of that process. So I'd say currently we're the only vendor that has that whole cycle from idea through risk, through to production and production inventory, right through to deployment and observability. And for us, that's the tooling that supports all the efforts in the business to protect themselves against reputational risk damage, regulatory risk, and many of the other, cost risks. I mean, there's plenty of people who are worried about, if I build this, is it going to cost a lot? And funny enough, when you look at generative AI, there's no economies of scale in generative AI because every time you inference the model, there's a cost. Obviously, in predictive, one model inference several times starts to get economies of scale. So it's going to be really important to understand that cost risk and whether that model's creeping out of whatever guardrails you set for it.
I mean, if you were to listen to the news, I would be surprised that any AI model gets through all that stringent testing that you've talked about there. So in terms of hitting all these different things, do you find that AI models are getting stuck at certain points? Is there certain bits where you find they're always getting stuck?
Because this is not about a pass-fail thing. This is about mitigation. It's understanding and being aware of the environment and how you're going to deploy the model, the use case and its pertinence to risk, HR being more pertinent than probably something that just does a summarization of a document in Microsoft Word, for example. So it's about understanding the appropriate levels of risk and mitigation and making sure that the observation is correct. This isn't about trying to contain the development of AI. This, for me, is about, in the same way that you see this in a supply chain or any production line, if you can ensure the quality and that the stages all flow and that what you originally planned at the beginning is what comes out at the end of as a high quality, instead of building one car or producing one good that gets your sales, it means that you can start to build the volume. So, in an ideal world, what I'd like to see is that AI governance enables people to focus on use cases and prioritizing the use cases. So taking the idea, one could argue the best ideas for efficiency are on the shop floor. How can I take an idea on the shop floor, triage it, understand whether I want to develop that idea, understand its risk, gradually move it through that pipeline and move it through to fruition, in a reasonable amount of time. And I can do that if I can rely on that manufacturing process, because I know that the standards are going to be upheld. I know the risks are going to be dealt with and complied with. So for me, it's not just about managing risk. It's about enabling that industrialization of AI.
I mean, this is a lot of work, to be fair. I know IBM is huge and you've got a lot of resources. But what gets an IBM to a point where they're putting something like this in place? Is it something you've seen internally? Is it something that your customers or into the market?
It's stuff we've seen internally. It's also built on the fact that most AI projects in the past have never made it to production. Why have they never made it to production? A lot of it's some of the things that I've described and no way of secure. And we're seeing it now with generative AI. Everyone's in a sandpit, proving use cases, but no one's, it's hard for them to move it to production. And I've seen companies pull back because they're worried they can't manage these risks. And I think really the thing that's moving things forward is, again, client engineering, our client engineering team, which, will work with a customer, for 4 to 6 weeks to take this technology and prove it with real use cases to show what it can do and perhaps illuminate some of the other things you need to wrap around it in terms of, ownership of various stages in the operating model, education, does the legal person understand what they're approving within the AI questionnaire, setting up the flows and those types of things. But you don't have to start there. You can start with simply a documentation of, what data did I use? What is this piece of AI doing, and monitoring? And that's where many people start. And then they build that risk approval layer, as they mature. So it's not about building it for the whole environment. You start with a use case, build what you need to build. And also, I'm conscious that this isn't just about generative AI. It works for AI. So actually, there's a lot of AI running in production. Whether you believe it or not, we're using AI on our phones today. You're using it in enterprise applications today. So the ability to start governing that. And I think another interesting area is procurement. We're procuring a lot of AI into our organizations. Do we really understand what it does? Do we understand the risks it puts our organizations under? How do we support procurement in onboarding and making the right decisions and making sure that AI, whether it be a model or a piece of AI, is used in the right way?
Well, is this something you guys are using internally at IBM to obviously?
Yes, So we have a strong ethics board, and indeed we've built the tooling out. So it's been built out and in fact the reason for this tooling is because we've been using it internally and gradually built it out. And indeed that journey continues, and we're constantly adding it. But we're really excited because it's garnering a lot of support in the market, and in terms of and a lot of really good meetings, because people are realizing that actually this is, when they move beyond the sandpit, they need to industrialize. How are they going to enable this? And this is really the missing piece.
So how do you see a tool like What's the Next Governance evolving over the next kind of year or two to kind of meet these data governance needs that are coming in?
Well, so the data governance needs we handle with IBM knowledge catalog, and there is a tight integration between the two. One area is when we build a model and we train the model on data. It sits in a data pile in the data lakehouse that we discussed earlier. But it sits in the data lakehouse, and the point is that we have to know the provenance of the data. It calls as a data card, which essentially allows it. Part of the component of understanding the AI is understanding the data used to train it. Obviously, that data card feeds from knowledge catalog, if you have one, or your governance catalog, to understand what the quality of the data was, what the provenance of the data was. Has it been filtered? Has it been filtered for hate and profanity? Do we know that the data is pure? That's all part of the audit and the approval mechanism. And indeed, even in the risk assessment, one of them is, do we have the right data? Has it been cleaned in the right way? Can we ensure that that constant flow of data is there? So there is a tight linking between data governance and AI governance. And one could argue that without both of those, you're not really governing AI, because if the data's spurious, it doesn't matter how much AI governance you do. Yeah. Your AI isn't going to be delivering the right outcomes.
Yeah. And final question really is, have you noticed it? So obviously using What's Next governance, is there anything that you've noticed when you're looking at these models, anything that stands out that it, again, could be falling down on, that it's picking up on, that it's making people aware of when they're putting these ideas into practice?
No, what it's highlighting, I think, for many organisations is that the stakeholders aren't just the data scientists. The stakeholders are the chief risk officer, the legal team, procurement, and that actually as you start to automate or augment things that you previously had people or departments doing, you manage through business conduct guidelines, it becomes really important to be able to get those teams together in a virtual way to approve and understand the risks of AI, and potentially to monitor and make sure it's still performing. We've seen lots of things in the market go very publicly wrong with AI. We don't need to go into them, but you've seen them happen. Yeah. And actually, firstly assessing the risk, maybe they wouldn't have happened, but also then making sure you're monitoring them in real time so that you can stop them happening if you see them merging towards things going wrong. So, if anything, it's highlighting the need for a team approach, and actually back to really something I'm passionate about, it's the human approach. It's still something that people have to decide. You can't delegate this to AI or technology.
Brilliant. So I'm going to put you on the spot. If people want to know more about What's Next governance, what did you do?
Well, they come to Assimilate. There's a good place to start, or they can come directly to IBM. There's a lot on IBM What's Next governance on the website. It's actually really informative videos of where we deployed it, how it works. Engage with us and client engineering through Assimilate, and we can run at our expense, a minimum viable product, a proof of concept, if you like, a pilot to show how this could work. We hold endless briefings on the subject. So there's a lot of information. It's a major area of investment, as is What's Next for IBM. And indeed, we believe this is a game changer, and we'd love to come and talk to you about it.
That's brilliant. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Brendan.
You're very welcome.
And we will see you next time. Thank you.